Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Ed Kohler with Avaya, and I'm here today to talk to you about cybersecurity and stealth services. Obviously, cybersecurity is becoming a top CXO concern, reading about it every week in the paper. And some of the reasons for this are multifold. First of all, the sheer number of attacks that are occurring. But on the back end, we see that there are increasing sophistication to the attacks, which is lending itself to the fact that many of these entities that are launching these events are quite organized. As a matter of fact, one industry analyst actually termed it as a complete industry in itself, and it can be quite lucrative. Also, we have to realize that some of these attacks are politically motivated and are actually sponsored by whole nations. So the landscape is clearly changing with the sophistication of the technologies and the techniques involved as far as breaching security boundaries. There's also another fact that there used to be people that believe that, look, my data is not that important, or, my data is really not online, therefore it is secure through some sort of air gap knowledge or the fact that a server is not physically available on the web. Folks have found that these are actually misconceived notions, and some people have paid dearly for that type of misbelief. As a result of this, regulatory councils in compliance is now requiring a very strong auditing requirement for the secure information that you're looking to protect. And this is in regards to HIPAA for patient care, PCI for credit card, CGIS for criminal justice. The list goes on and on and on. They're not only requesting you to know the data that you're looking to protect, but actually account for where it resides in your network and how it moves through your organization. That actually gets to the point where you have to have some sort of flow diagram to show the data footprint and the systems that need to see the data and those that don't. And as we all know, the Security 101 is systems that don't need to see information, or people that don't need to know information shouldn't know that information, and then that creates the concept of a secure security boundary. Now that's all well and good, but we realize that this is a difficult bar to reach, particularly with the increased virtualization environments that we're running into in today's IT world. And IoT, the Internet of Things, is really expanding this footprint much faster than regulatory councils are getting a handle on things. And the result of this are actually, three-phase. The first point is that networks are very, very highly complex. When you look at a typical IP routed infrastructure for an enterprise, and you want to lock down secure routed segments, there's quite a bit of engineering involved in creating route policies and access control lists, and you realize that this has to happen in an atomic fashion all the way across the end-to-end data path. That does a couple things. That creates a lot of human interaction, first of all, with the network, and anytime you have a lot of human interaction, you have the possibility of some sort of error of input, and you can have a pinhole develop and actually exist for quite some time before either an auditor or much worse, an attacker actually finds it. The other side to the coin is that networking technology is complex, but also security technologies are very complex as well. When you look at intrusion detection devices and firewalls and encryption, many of these technologies are very complex to administrate and to use appropriately. Now, there are many vendors trying to ease the user interface burden, but nonetheless, the technology is a fairly high bar to reach, and many times to have the complete set of the appropriate defense in depth measures typically is not performed by the enterprise. As a result, there's an overemphasis on perimeter demarcation, the actual firewalls, and then the use of encryption within the core. Many folks say, well, if I put the firewalls in, get a real hard shell on the outside of the perimeter, and then I use encryption to move confidential information, then I should be okay. And when we look at it at first light, that seems like it might be a valid approach. You have encrypted data from the client to the server. I can even have a firewall and IDS demarcation that it can actually recognize the client and trust the data. The point, though, is that the security device itself is really blind to the malicious transport. It's blind to the data, unless it can decrypt and re-encrypt the data, which means it has to be a mid-com solution. Most firewalls don't perform that function. They simply trust the data that's coming across, given the fact that it's coming from a known client. But as we can see, malicious people can move data across the network as well. Once you start allowing general encrypted data across the core, particularly strong encryption, malicious data can be transported, and security devices, intrusion defense measures may not be able to actually appropriately determine that content. If that individual is able to masquerade as a client, then actually he has access to the system. And at that point, the server is actually saying, hey, it's all encrypted to me. It's coming from someone that actually seems to be authenticated. And next thing you know, we have an attack. In reality, there is no defense in depth in this model. The firewall is really trusting on a group community issue. And that's all the attacker really has to do is emulate a group, a member of that group, and he can actually gain access and push malicious transport past the firewall and actually succeed in an attack. Now, if we look at the way this works in concert with IP hop routing, many people create a general core. And even if you lock down a policy environment, as in this case example where we're showing a very constrained path from point A to point B, you'll see that there is a hop by hop by hop by hop behavior. And each of these IP hops obviously are traceable. The routes must be visible to be used. And really, when you lock down an environment to create something like this, you use access control lists and route policies, which actually limit path visibility. This creates a catch-22, however, because when you limit path visibility, you limit resiliency. There are no alternate routes available. So if, for instance, the route on IP hop 4 failed, and either the router went down or the link went down, there are no alternate routes available. They have all been limited or obfuscated by the use of the access control list and the route policy. So there's only so much you can limit a path, and you always constrain your resiliency when you do so. In concert with, we look at SDNFX Fabric Connect, we use the concept of Ethernet switched paths. We move data without using an IP routing protocol. So we don't use OSPF, we don't use RIP, we don't use any of those legacy protocols, even up to BGP and MPLS. We don't need them anymore. Basically what we do is we provide a set of programmed Ethernet switch paths, which basically behave in a very deterministic fashion against a database environment that's actually held in every single node. This creates a network that is actually dark to IP topology discovery techniques. And as you can see in this example, even though we have multiple Ethernet switch path hops across the network end to end, it is one hop. That's the end-to-end virtual service network. Now, the important thing to realize is that we are not compromising any resiliency of this system. It's the service that is limited. It's not the network behavior. So if, for instance, the third Ethernet switch path were to fail, any available alternate path would be available to this service, and it would still be dark, it would still be constrained. This is an important difference between what we're able to do with Ethernet switch paths and SDNFX and a typical IP routed backbone. Now, if we go ahead and look at this, we can construct these stealth services in various fashions. We can actually support stealth in the global route table. Even though the subnets on each end of the network are advertised against a global route or VRF0, the actual hop-by-hop behaviors, the actual Ethernet switch paths in between are stealth. Everything is one hop away. It becomes a one-hop global enterprise. We can also create layer 3 private IPVPN environments, which are basically based on services of constructed Ethernet switch paths paired up with VRFs or virtual route forwarders. This type of environment actually yields a private internet route table. And we can also create a layer 2 entity as well, where we actually take VLANs and we can construct an end-to-end environment, and we can create a completely stealth, dark layer 2 end-to-end environment. The point is all of these can exist as islands. They can be ships in the night. They never will see each other, and there is no way way for data to penetrate between these data domains. And we've had several hackathons, both hosted by customers and also shows as well as universities to prove the fact. So we can provide for total isolation if required. However, with the appropriate network design and the appropriate considerations against your security demarcations, you can take these services and you can actually bring them to an actual firewall, an IDS system, where actually you can start to have these systems be able to communicate back and forth across the security demarcation. There's a couple things that happen here, is that because of the fact that we're allowing the network to do the primary burden of segmentation, it allows for the vast reconsideration of the security demarcation design. Firewalls can be consolidated. You can actually bring the services to the security demarcation point rather than forcing the security demarcation points out into the field. And then as a tertiary point, note that the layer 2 service below is still completely isolated. So other networks can become totally isolated islands. As a matter of fact, you could have multiple firewall security demarcations, and you could have a provider type example where you have Department A with its own firewall with its series of private internets, and then Department B with a completely different set, and then perhaps a virtual service network at a higher level that links those two firewalls together for an enterprise global connectivity. So the expansion can be quite comprehensive from a logical topology perspective. Now, when we start to do this micro-segmentation approach, using encryption with virtual service networks starts to add security, because now I have my authorized clients and they can only get in once they're authorized and brought into the network and are actually able to provide a defense in depth type of classification in order to gain access to the virtual service network. Users that are across the general core, as a matter of fact, if you deploy the fabric correctly, this scenario should never even occur. These two individuals actually should be within a guest portal and its own micro segment. But let us say that they are in the global routing table and they are moving data across the network. The fact that they are in the wrong VSN means that, you know what, you're not part of the community, you are not part of the group. I'm not allowing you to traverse. And this starts to add the concept of defense in depth and micro-segmentation. And when we marry that with the concept of stealth, the fact that, attackers cannot see the IP paths and the IP routes, they really become lost in the framework. There's very little information for them to work with. It becomes very difficult for them to move forward. They can't move east or west, and they can't move northbound. And typically, remember, that's the cybersecurity compass. An attacker's going to come into the network, and once he gains access, he's going to attempt to move east or west laterally through your organization until he can find a system that he can compromise and then do a privilege escalation to move northbound into your environment. And then they'll do the same thing. They'll move east and west again until they find another system, gradually getting closer and closer to their target. So what we see is that these lower level implementations within the fabric architecture really take out the first three rungs that an attacker is going to use in order to enumerate and gain access to your systems. Now, these services can be strung end-to-end. For instance, this is an example of an end-to-end PCI compliant cardholder environment. And notice that the element constructs are very simple. On the right hand of the slide, we have a layer 3 IPVPN, which is what we term as a L3 VSN. This is basically nothing more than an ISID, an individual service identifier, which is nothing more than a composite of end-to-end Ethernet switch paths. And that entity is then married up to VRFs. It's the ISID that provides the peering. It's the ISID that provides the IPVPN. And as you can see, it becomes one nice atomic dark entity that moves from the point of sale location up to the data center demarcation, where we have a single secure port from the VRF into the firewall demarcation. And then on the back end, we use secure layer 2 stealth networks, layer 2 VSNs, in order to move the data up to the PCI DSS application or up to the bank or whatever purposes that we need. So as you can see, we can provide a very good atomic demarcation of the end end-to-end topology using as few technologies as possible, which to a security compliance auditor is a very, very good thing. The fewer technologies you have involved in the end-to-end footprint, the easier it is to audit and the easier it is to account for. Now, when we start to look at the proper use of the technology, if it's done correctly, you actually get a minimization of the exposed attack surface. So if we take this diagram as an example, I have two systems here that really need to be exposed. Basically, the firewall that's touching out to the internet, and then obviously anything in my DMZ, such as my session border controller in this example. That's a semi-stealth system. It's wrapped with stealth services on each end, but it's still registered as a resource in DNS. It's still out there. People can connect to it. I have open ports through the firewall. So it is a semi-stealth system. But as we start to move further into the network, you see that the firewall on the back end, the secondary firewall, actually is wrapped with stealth services on all sides. So it actually is very difficult to discover. You'd actually have to compromise the firewall and the front end in order to actually get access and get any notion that that secondary firewall even exists. When we start moving into the network further and further, you're moving further and further into stealth network connectivity. So by the time we move to the far left-hand side of the slide, you see the internal Avaya session border controller. That is a completely stealth dark system. All internal UC communications is really happening undercover, and not only is the system not really easy to attack, but also it's not very easy to discover either. We could also challenge the fact that it's almost impossible to discover. You have to become part of the UC footprint in order to do that. So this leads to the concept of defense in depth and also in breadth. Realize that you have to have layers of defense in order to make it as difficult for an attacker to get to the goods as possible. But also realize that the IoT is forcing us to look at a breadth approach as well. So we have to approach security with multiple endpoints, with multiple technologies. And as you can see, we have to realize that there are also different types of sessions that occur. The ability to authenticate and get users onto the network. We handle that with identity engines. The ability to inspect and authorize real-time traffic and act as an intrusion protection system with deep packet inspection for UC data flows. That's our session border controller. To provide the dark topology with the very, very hard micro-segmentation, that's obviously stealth DNFX. And then obviously a secure wireless edge with real good built-in security mechanisms such as rogue AP detection, honeypotting, and also actually automated provisioning of not only the WLANs and the edge, but actually control of the application profiles that are allowed at the wireless edge as well. All of that is provided by our wireless LAN solution 9100. But the point that I want to emphasize here is that it is the people and the policies that really make it complete. You can spend as much money as you want on even our own technologies within Avaya. But if you don't have the right kind of people and the right kind of policies in place to use the technologies in an appropriate and consistent fashion, then all of this is for naught. So that comes to the summary. Data protection is really all about both people, processes, and technology. You really need to start looking at where the private data exists in your organization and develop the trace processes and the systems to validate those notions, particularly when the data footprint changes or expands. You really need to make sure that you keep track of that. You also have to develop flow diagrams of the interacting systems and the private data. And then obviously devise your virtual service network designs to work and protect that actual flow diagram that results. Once you get done with that, however, you're not done. Develop penetration testing techniques specific to the private environment. Actually hire hackers or have people on your staff that are capable of doing it and actually actually have them attack the confidential data footprint, see if they can discover it, see if they can penetrate it, do a constant ongoing evaluation of your threats, vulnerabilities, and risks. Then remember, the more technologies that are involved in the private network environment, the more engineering and penetration testing is required. And also, there's a high probability that there's a longer time the auditor is going to be with you on an hourly basis. The less technology you use end-to-end, and remember, SDNFX can be used end-to-end, the better off you are, because it makes a more consistent footprint that is a lot easier to validate from an auditing perspective. The final thing is develop clear policies and procedures that are clearly understood by everyone in the organization, and make sure that repercussions are actually made public, and so people know what will happen if they do not follow the policies that are mandated by your organization. Okay, so that about wraps it up. I hope this has been helpful to you, and I hope you have found the information informative. If you want to know more about stealth SDNFX technology or how to design your network to support the appropriate micro-segmentation environments, please feel free to reach out to your local Avaya representative. Have a pleasant day.